You're listening to the Business Builders Book Club, helping you bridge the gap between knowledge and action. Whether it's an old classic or just hit the shelves, we've got you covered. Follow along with us and remember, information only becomes wisdom after it's applied.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in again to the Business Builders Book Club. This is episode number 2, and it's episode 2 in our 3-part series on 3 Simple Steps by Trevor Blake. And joining us for these 3 episodes, the co-host for this stretch of episodes is Jacob Manishevitz. Jacob, how's it going?
Good, Russell. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. How was your week?
Yeah, it's been good so far. Things have started to pick up a little bit. June is it's heating up with the weather at the same time. So fingers crossed for a good summer. I think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Excited to be back. I really love this book. It's a great place for to start in your personal and professional development. And, part 2 is very, very interesting. And it's definitely part of that lifelong journey, the biggest part, I think, in my opinion, of the lifelong journey.
Absolutely.
Out of all 3 parts in this book, yeah.
Yeah, and we'll get into it more as we talk about it, but there's a section on it that's a lot about nature, and I think that's a great, what you were saying, like now we're able to get outside, it's warm out, and with some of the restrictions like lifting with this the pandemic, people are able to get out and enjoy it more. And I got my first post-pandemic haircut, so you're looking pretty good too. You must have gone somewhere too.
I didn't. I actually just put some gel in my hair today, but I booked my first haircut.
Okay.
It's not for another couple weeks because the barbershop is booked solid, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's a good feeling, man. I was wearing hats every single day because it got big.
Yep. I understand that for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. So before we get into this second section of the book, when we ended last episode, we talked about something we do to kind of track and take a look at how we can implement some of the concepts from there. So can you remind the listeners what sort of, just in broad terms, we covered last week and what we said we were going to sort of take a look at?
Yeah, for sure. So last week, broadly, I guess, was about protecting your mentality. And staying away from the negative and embracing the positive, spinning the negative into positive as well. Our takeaways were to practically implement not involving ourselves in negative situations in everyday life and being aware of what might be having a negative impact on our psyche that we may not have been aware of in the past. So just kind of practicing that daily awareness of what is being impacted on ourselves. And so our strategy was to kind of notice when we were experiencing negative emotions or notice when negativity was being influenced upon us, and working to spin that around, whether it's through working with somebody that you live with or in everyday situations where you encounter things in line at the grocery store or with the people at work who may be complaining or have a negative view of life, and we were trying to just be more aware of those situations and then spin them into more positive energy to surround ourselves with.
Absolutely. So like sort of 2 steps, trying to limit the negative input and then also whenever possible spinning that input or spinning your internal conversation into something positive, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it all starts with awareness as well. I mean, the practice begins with just using that muscle where you are more aware of exactly what's going around from an energy perspective, and because we go through life not really realizing a lot of these things and how much of a negative impact they can have on ourselves. So it's really just strengthening that muscle and practicing noticing when we're in a situation like that.
Absolutely. So did you have any sort of moments that stood out this week for you that you found like, hey, here's exactly what we were talking about last week?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think specifically when I'm driving, it's not letting the negativity that I feel bubble up when somebody else is a bad driver. There were a couple situations this last week. Actually, they were both yesterday where I was driving and I was going to make a left turn, not at an intersection, but just at a side street that was pulling off of the street that I was on. Yeah. And so I was slowing down, put my signal on, and then the guy behind me made the exact same left turn, but before I did. So he made a really quick and wide left turn behind. So as I'm making the turn, I realized there's this guy trying to turn into the thing, and like it was ridiculously unsafe. And then the other situation was some guy almost cut me off. He just didn't put a signal on, didn't check his blind spot, and so I had to honk at him, and instead of, I had to control myself from wanting to drive up next to the guy and yell at him through my window and that kind of thing. And you just got to let it go, because it's not your issue. And the most important thing is that you look out for yourself and that you are safe in that situation and that you didn't get hurt. And, you just hope that that driver doesn't go ahead and hurt anybody else later on.
Yeah, that's all you can do. That's so funny that happened to you, because I think I think it was within the last week even. I was driving with my girlfriend and she was driving. I was in the passenger side. She was making a left-hand turn just like that, except it was at a light. It was at an intersection. And the guy just did the exact same thing from behind, went before her. So she's turning left wide into this intersection. He's like trying to squirm in. It's like, so that's definitely a situation where you got to control your anger a little bit.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I for tracking this, I kind of made a log on my phone here. Let me see. I had a couple different instances of it. So I was in Walmart and I walked up and I found myself staring right at the tabloids. That's one of them.
You can't not, man.
It's so difficult.
Yeah.
So I just
I don't know what it is. They make it bright and colorful, and it's just the words that you see, and you're like, what? No.
Yeah, it's real life clickbait right in front of your eyes, right? Yeah. So I just turned around, and the whole time I was waiting in line was like backwards, because I'm like, if I'm facing this way, like I'm just gonna, my eyes are gonna shift down to it. I'm gonna read about what garbage is happening in the royal family right now, and that's not helping anybody. So that was one of them. And I realized how easy it is to agree with somebody who's sort of putting out negative ideas. Like we had a friend over and we were having a conversation, and it's just like this person was very, very focused on the news and talking about everything that was going on, and like sort of pessimistic outlook on things. And it's like it gets me thinking, and I start thinking the same way that he is, and I find myself nodding and like being like, and because you just want to agree with somebody when you're having a conversation. For right? Sure. It's so I found myself struggling to flip that conversation and sort of steer it in a way where I wouldn't have to be kind of taking that in, but then also like putting that out, because like even if it's just body language of me nodding, that's like telling myself inside that I actually do agree with it, right?
Yeah, for sure. And putting that out into the universe as well, showing that you are, involved in that kind of negativity. And there's a lot in the news to avoid, and things like I read an article the other day about how Florida has over 100,000 COVID cases just in the state of Florida. And, when this all first started, there was articles about, and you could read about how spring break wasn't postponed or anything like that. And people in Florida were still going about, doing their daily thing. And I'm sure, some states are worse than others and some countries are worse than others, but it's just, you can't help but think that the actions of those people are not only affecting their community, but their state, their country, and even, the global community. But it's a lot that you got to kind of just push out of your mind and look on the bright side. Yeah,
and it's like, who are we to put all of that on our backs, right? Like, what positive effect is that going to have on your life if you're thinking like, oh, there's all these huge problems, right? Like, if you're constantly thinking about that, it's pretty hard to go after your own goals and have the space in your life to do anything else but worry, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's not your responsibility to worry, right? It's your responsibility to take control of your own life.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think it was generally successful this week, but I think the more and more that I think about it, I'll probably realize I'm doing it more and more. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'll
for sure. It's not just a 1 week kind of thing. It's definitely, it takes a long time, and it compounds as well. The more you learn how to react, and the more aware you become, and eventually you get used. It becomes second nature to avoid those kind of things.
Yeah, it reminded me of this quote, and I'll butcher it, but it was something like, you don't know how much you don't know until you know a little bit, right? So it's like, I thought like, oh yeah, like I'm not having that many negative thoughts throughout my week. But it's like when I start thinking about it more and more, I recognize it. And I'm sure as I start to know more and get more practice in this sort of space, I'm going to realize, oh man, I'm actually thinking negatively all the time. I'm just so used to it that I'm not honing in on it.
Yeah, exactly. And at that point, once you know how much negativity there actually is, there's that much more you can accomplish by knocking it down and turning it around. And like I said, it compounds, so it has that exponential effect.
Awesome. Yeah, well, it's something I'm looking forward to getting even more into. So for this next section of the book, again, 3 Simple Steps by Trevor Blake. It's so conveniently chopped up for a show like this. Step 1, step 2, step 3, we can just do it like that, right? So step 1 we talked about covers mentality, controlling your mind, controlling your input. So step 2 kind of takes a little bit of a left-hand turn and goes a different direction. Do you want to give a brief summary of like the main ideas of this section?
Yeah, for sure. So what I took away, it's very practical section. So there's a very specific practice that you can take away from it, and for what he calls it, if I remember correctly, quiet time is what he refers to this practice as, and it can be interpreted as meditation, or any other kind of word like that. But like we discussed last week when I said the word
manifest, I think it was.
Manifest, yeah. Some people have a negative connotation with that, and the same with, I think, the word meditation. Not me personally, but I think there may be people out there. And because when I initially thought of meditation, I thought of a Buddhist monk, sitting in a position for hours and hours on end, completely disassociated from the physical world. And that's definitely a type of meditation, but that's more of a Eastern meditation, I guess. And what Trevor Blake is talking about is it's just a chance to be quiet inside your own mind. And there's different ways to help that happen. And nature is one of those ways and that's why I think you brought it up earlier. And so he talks about a daily practice, or a practice whenever it is possible for you in the schedule of your day to have some time alone, in complete silence or accompanied by natural sounds, which I thought was very interesting. So, complete silence is great, but if you can be in a place where there's some birds chirping or a creek rustling by or something like that, then that even adds to it a little bit more, which I thought was very interesting.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, living downtown, for myself, the natural sounds are
a little more
challenging on the
challenging.
streets and fire engines going by. So, complete silence is better for me than trying to explore those natural sounds. But the idea is that it gives you time for your subconscious to bring ideas to the surface, and it gives you time for your neural pathways to kind of open up to make new connections, and you become very vulnerable and malleable at that point. And so what's important to do as well is to remember to put that shield up once you start your day, because your neural connections are ready to learn new things, but you don't want them to go out there and start learning negative behaviors or experience negative influences, because they're so ready to create new connections. So you want to accompany your quiet time with being able to experience more positivity throughout your day.
Right, that's the time that you're most receptive. So I think he uses the concept of plugging into something positive, right? And so he says nature is his favorite way to do that, right? I think this whole section, the thing that I most grabbed from it is that his idea is that good ideas are constantly inside of us, and we have all the answers to any of the problems in our life already inside of us. But and they're trying to come out. They're trying to express themselves, but because of the hustle and bustle of our lives and the way that we've been raised, we're not so able to latch on to those ideas that are naturally there. Right? So he's sort of saying that this quiet time that he's taking, this sort of 10, 20 minutes, and we can go over more specifics of how to do the practice in a bit, but you take this 20 minutes and this is supposed to sort of silence your usual routine and allow for these ideas to bubble up, right?
Yeah, exactly. it's a very interesting concept, for the idea that those ideas are already there, and that you just have to kind of give them a pathway for them to come out.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that he goes so much into the biology of it and the neural science, because I think that's a good point for some people who are less prone to gravitating to some of the more new age concepts. It gives a good latch on point for those types of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it makes sense from a biological perspective that, in a natural environment, that we're more prone to, or more receptive to growing and, being stimulated mentally, because, that's where we came from. And that's, 30, 40,000 years ago, that's where we existed naturally, not in these concrete jungles, but in regular jungles. And so it just makes sense that being surrounded by that kind of, whether you believe it's an energy or whether it's just, that biochemical, connection that we have to it because we came from it, it makes sense that, that's where we would naturally thrive the most.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's interesting how he goes on to say that not just like we thrive in this sort of natural environment, like he's saying, go out in nature, plug into nature. I think he goes even further and sort of makes this jump and says there's like an infinite sort of wisdom in nature and in our history and in our connected to this, and if we plug into it, we can sort of, the answers are there as well. So how did that make you feel? Like, I think some people might think, okay, that's like a little bit more of a jump than I'm willing to take, but have you found that to be true in your experience?
I'll be honest, and I'll say that I haven't been in nature as much as I would like to. Just because I do live downtown, I don't have ready access to it. If I lived, somewhere more suburban, I feel like it would be more accessible for me to go out for hikes or be able to eat my lunch outside or something like that. And, we have a terrace on the third floor of our condo, and, but it's fabricated. It's grass it's sodded grass, and it's arranged flowers and that kind of thing. And what you really need to do is be out in naturally formed nature, right? You need to be out in a forest on a hike by a creek, by a waterfall, something like that. And so it's hard for me to say personally because I haven't been able to explore that as much as I'd like to. The quiet time indoors by myself, I have been able to practice that, but less so, I guess, the exploring the natural side of it.
Right. And so even if you don't have the natural side, after you take this quiet time, I guess the substitute is just being able to plug into something positive, or taking that moment to bring down that mental shield of positivity that's just going to keep that negativity out for the day, right? Like bringing that in.
Yeah, exactly. So what I've kind of substituted that with, I guess, is bringing in an affirmation practice and a gratitude practice. So after that, I experienced that period of quiet, I immediately repeat some affirmations and some gratitude to myself. And so that brings in that positivity and kind of centers my energy and really starts my day off right. I tried to do it as much as possible right at the very beginning of the day, because that's before you really, you get bogged down with your to-do list for the day. And it's a good practice to, just spend the first hour just keeping your mind clear. And then once you do jump into your to-do list and that kind of thing, you're a little more centered, and it's less stress to start the day, and you've got that shield up, you've got that positivity ingrained in yourself, you've strengthened those neural pathways that you've opened up by using the quiet time, and you're kind of ready to go and start your day.
Yeah, I think that's such a great way to start your day, and sort of can be a springboard to more productive things. And I was thinking, for the listeners who may not be reading this book along with us, I hope that people are digging into it and taking a look, but who knows, maybe there'll be some listeners that just want to get the main ideas. So for them,
For sure.
There's I think they said 9 steps to bringing in this quiet time into your day, and I have them down here, so I'll go over them quickly, and maybe we can touch on the ones that we haven't talked so much about already.
Sure.
So the first one is that you should do it alone. I think we've talked about that a little bit. I know some people meditate in groups and some people practice yoga in groups, but Trevor suggests that this is better to do alone by yourself, right?
Yeah, and I think it's just more convenient that way, as opposed to, having a scheduled class or having to wait for other people to do it. You need to be able to do it when it's convenient for you and when it's most effective for yourself. So yeah, I don't think doing it with other people is really an important aspect of the practice.
Yeah. And so the second step is that it's better to do it in the morning. We've talked about that, all the benefits it can have. He does mention, though, at the beginning, it's important to just be more consistent than perfect, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, perfection is nothing that we should ever be striving for, because it just sets you up for disappointment. It's consistency, and you'll see, if you do it perfectly once a week, it's not going to have the same effect that if you do it consistently 6 days a week. It's about that effort that you're putting in there, and it's, again, the energy you're putting out to the universe is that you are trying to do it consistently, and that you're committed to this practice, and that you do want to see the benefits of the practice, not that just you're trying to do flash in the pan, get it right once, and then you're good to go for the rest of your life. It's something inherent in the word practice. You need to keep working at it every day, and consistency, and then that's just honestly for everything in your life, personal and professional. Consistency is what you should be striving for. You may never get it perfect, and you may never get it right, because your definition of perfection and your definition of getting it right may evolve over time. Consistency is key.
Yeah.
Always.
It reminds me, I know we both come from music backgrounds, and it reminds me of that, or working out. It's like, if you doing 5 minutes every day is better than doing 35 minutes one day, right? Per week, right?
Totally.
So
exactly.
Just having that sort of consistent muscle memory building up in the practice will make it a habit versus just once a week, right? So
exactly. That's exactly like you said. You want to make it a habit, and doing it once a week is, you're going to forget. Your muscles are going to forget by the next, whether it's working out or whether it's a mental activity, or whether it's something like in sales, like doing cold calling or something like that. You want to be consistent with it every day, as opposed to just trying to lump it all into one day.
Absolutely. So far you've got to do it alone. You should do it in the morning. The next one is that you should choose a quiet space. We talked a little bit about that, so we can skip over that a bit. It says to sit comfortably and not lay down for this practice. If you're doing it in the morning, he says, hey, you're probably going to fall back asleep if you're just laying in bed trying to do this.
That's me, 100%. Yeah. I'll give you a tip. Wake up and just do 15 push-ups and drink a whole glass of water, and you will feel so much more awake than you did a minute ago, kind of thing. So that's kind of how I get my body stimulated. You do get your heart rate up, and then down a whole glass of water, and then your body is kind of ready to start its day, and then that's that's what I do right before I get into that practice.
Absolutely. I've noticed that if I take, for my mornings, the mornings that I'm most successful, I always take care of my mind, my body, and my spirit. Right. So I feel like if I can do those 3 things before starting the day, that it's just going to get the ball rolling and make it an actual positive, productive day. Right. So mind is just waking up. It could be a part of this, or it could be reading a book for a little bit in the morning.
Yep.
Body getting some sort of exercise, and then spirit, you said, you do gratitude practice, or maybe this even is quiet time. Right. That can be the kind of sort of quasi spiritual thing that you do in the morning.
Yep, absolutely. Yoga is also good, because yoga can kind of combine that spiritual and physical activity, right? You get a bit of a sweat going at the same time as becoming centered and focusing on your breathing and connecting your mind to your body. So that's another good way to do it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Those are the 3 pillars that you really got to hammer out in the morning.
It reminds me of another book, Miracle Morning. I think you mentioned you've read that one, right?
Yeah, good book.
Yeah.
Very good book.
So
it focuses a little bit more on habits, I think, and stacking habits, so that your morning routine just becomes second nature, which is probably the next step after if you wanted to extrapolate on this step 2 from 3 simple steps, that's probably where you might want to go next, is Miracle Morning, because it's also a fantastic book.
Yeah, so that's Miracle Morning. I think that's by Hal Elrod.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
right.
And he's done a whole series of them, like Miracle Morning for real estate investors, Miracle Morning for athletes, like all these kinds of different spin-offs of it too. So you can kind of personalize it. And then
he focuses a lot on affirmations as well. So those affirmations are specific to what your goals are and what your intentions are, which is very important. And that's a big step in the morning process as well, is including those affirmations.
It's so interesting how all of these books, they kind of intertwine. Like a lot of them are saying the same sort of message, but depending on how it's framed, it can kind of resonate more or less with a person.
Yeah, I totally agree. And either they're all stemming off of the same, what I believe they're all stemming off the same law of attraction, right? The power of putting something out into the universe, the fact that the universe will be able to bring it back to you.
Mm-hmm. And all of them touch on it in their own way, right? So I think
exactly, yeah.
There's got to be some sort of science to it that we just don't understand yet. Like I was thinking this when I was talking about linking into nature and having that sort of infinite wisdom, and it might sound like airy to some people who are like so dead set on like what is the scientific fact, what is scientifically proven. But that always makes me think like 200 years ago, the scientists in the society, everyone thought, yeah, we have a pretty good picture of the way things are. But now we look back on 200 years ago and we think, man, those people believed this, they believed this, they believed this, and they all thought that they were right, right? So who are we to be the ones that say we know what the world is right now? What are people going to be saying about us 200 years from now?
Yeah, of course. They may be looking back and saying, like, most people didn't believe in the law of attraction. Like, how ridiculous was that? It's clearly a real thing.
Yeah, like
and I was reading a book. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, they'll say, here's this explanation, this scientific, here's how these subatomic particles interact so that this happens, right?
They'll be able to prove it. Yeah, 100%. I was reading a book recently that likened the law of attraction, I forget which book it was specifically, to gravity. So, is gravity science? Like, it's a natural, we consider it a natural law, right? It's a constant thing that exists almost everywhere, or at least within our atmosphere, and it exists, in the galaxy to a certain extent, depending on, the mass of planets and objects and all that kind of stuff that I don't really understand. But they likened it to gravity in a way that it exists everywhere. You just have to know that it's always having an effect on you, and you have to know how to manipulate it, right?
Yeah, that's so huge. And I think that speaks even more to the thing, like, who are we to say what we know and what we don't? Like, before we were constantly experiencing gravity for millennia before we had any idea what it was, right?
Yeah, until that apple fell on Sir Isaac Newton's head. And
so
then
the story
realized,
goes.
Hey, maybe there's something something to this.
There's more to this, and then all these equations, over my head for sure.
Yeah.
And so we've touched on 4 of those steps to actually take quiet time. You got to do it alone, do it in the morning, do it in a silent space, sit comfortably, don't lay down. Then he talks about something called energy cleansing. I sort of interpreted this as like a mental reset. Like he says, like, to wipe your hands over your face, or to sort of like have some sort of habit that prepares you for the quiet time. Have you found any sort of physical routines that have helped you get into that space?
Yeah, it definitely does something. I don't know whether it's just kind of a biochemical thing within your body, but, rubbing your hands together until they're warm and then kind of rubbing them over your face. I think he uses an example in the book where, people who are stressed out or who are going through grief or something like that, their hands are on their face and they're kind of like, it kind of helps you to shed some negativity and, maybe from the day before or from the night before. And it's definitely worth trying. And I mean, there's nothing to lose in trying it. And if it works for you and, augments your practice, then, more power to it.
Yeah. And even if it's a placebo, who cares, right? If it gets you into this space and it actually has an effect, right?
Yep.
That's fine. So energy cleansing, that's the 5th step. And the 6th is, he says, relax and just focus on bringing the relaxation through all of your body. And this is where I feel like we're getting into the bulk of what the quiet time actually is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And then he recommends connecting with the ground. So this is like imagining roots are coming out the bottom of you and kind of grabbing on there, sort of ground you to the moment. And then he says,
I think it's definitely just about centering and focusing on your breathing as well at the same time. And that's where it has a lot of similarities to traditional meditation. That's kind of that same mindset and body set that you want to be in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then so for the bulk of the quiet time, he says just continue to follow your breath, and when you get distracted, bring your mind back. It sounds a lot like traditional meditation, but he does make the point that in your mind, it's beneficial to segment this quiet time off from any other meditation practice or anything else you're doing, and just purely see this quiet time as an opportunity for subconscious problem solving. Right? He says to like sort of delineate between these two things.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, if you have a traditional meditation practice that you're in, separating the two is definitely a good thing. I don't know if with traditional meditation, I don't think it has to be done in the morning. I don't think they're so strict about, the location and that kind of thing. So if you can focus on this, in the morning in a quiet spot on your own, following these, 9 steps, then it's definitely, it may help you a little bit more in your personal and professional life. And there are benefits that I've experienced that I think are similar to that you would experience with traditional meditation as well. And it's just more of a focused mindset. And it has a lot to do with interpersonal reaction as well. So for example, if you have a slew of meetings that day, you end up being more present in those meetings, and you end up being less distracted during them. And I find that, a lot of people, when you're having a coffee meeting or a Zoom meeting these days, whatever the case is, people are very distracted, most of the time, and they're not listening to what you're saying, and they're only thinking about the next thing that they're going to say or the next question that they're going to ask. And, being aware and being mindful and being present with that person creates a better connection than you would otherwise. And it's important for people like you and I, who are in sales and who want to build relationships with clients and who want to attract the right people into our professional circles, to be present and to practice that mindfulness during conversations and interactions, because it'll build a much deeper relationship. And so having this kind of practice early in the day really gets you, it strengthens that mental muscle, wherein if I was chatting with you and then I started to get distracted and started thinking about what I have to do later that day, or who I have to call, or that my mom said this to me yesterday, I need to follow up, you learn how to move away from the distractions and keep yourself present in the conversation, because really the only thing that matters is this second right now, and then this second right now. And if you are not present in that second, you are wasting that second. And the magic that exists in a connection that you make with somebody when you're having a conversation, when they have the same like mind that you do, so when they're on the same wavelength and they realize the same thing that you do about how this second right now is the most important thing that matters. And if I'm not making the most of this interaction with you right now, then I'm really squandering it. It can be incredibly magical, but to get to that point, you really have to focus and be aware. And having this practice in the morning definitely gets you off on the right foot. It gives you that platform on which to stand that can help you achieve those moments throughout your day.
Yeah, if you can do anything like this, taking quiet time to improve this sort of ability to connect with another person, what more beneficial a skill is there, right? Any line of work that you're in, if you're running your own business, like a lot of people who are listening to this might be, that's one of the most important things, whether you're hiring, whether you're looking for more clients, no matter what business you're in, you're going to be interfacing with other people in some way. So like if you can take this time to develop this interpersonal relation, this connection skill, so that you can really connect with people, become friends with them, I can't think of a more powerful skill to develop.
I agree, and it's something that I'm reading. We spoke about Yuval Noah Harari last week, and his books Homo Sapiens and then Homo Deus, and right now I'm reading 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, in which he talks about how we should prepare for the growth of AI and biotech and infotech, and how pretty much anything can be learned from AI. But this magical connection and interaction that we're talking about is not something that a person can have with a computer, or a computer can have with another computer, where in most cases almost everything else can be outsourced to that person-computer relationship or computer-computer relationship, even to the point where the computer can sense the biochemical changes that are happening in our bodies, and therefore know what kind of emotions we are experiencing and make decisions based on that. They still won't have that feel that two people have when they're interacting with each other.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that's why, like, you hear the classic business advice, like, you should be focusing on the high dollar per hour activities in your day, right? It's not a coincidence that these high dollar per hour activities are the ones that computers can't replicate, right? They're these human things. Like, if you're in sales, looking for leads and finding clients and talking to people, that's the high dollar per hour activity, and it's because it can't be outsourced, right? You need to have this very human skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. It's building those relationships for the long term. Like you said, that's what brings in that's what has the biggest return on investment. And it may not be immediate, and that's what a lot of people can't see as well, but in the long term you reap the rewards.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think this is an incredible section of the book, and I've always sort of had a love of nature and loved getting out there, and this is sort of something that's been keeping me sane throughout all of the lockdown stuff due to the pandemic. Is going out and hiking most days of the week and getting out into nature for a little bit, because if you can kind of empty your mind there, I think even just from scientific studies, it shows that it increases your ability to think clearly and your, I guess, dopamine levels, your happiness levels, right? So I definitely relate with this section of the book and agree with a lot of the findings that Blake is laying out here.
Yeah, for sure. And you never know if it works until you try it, right? So you really, and you got to be consistent with it. If you go for one hike, you may not feel the benefits of it, but if you make it a consistent practice, and you're lucky enough to be in a position where you can make it a consistent practice, then you'll definitely feel some kind of on a very deep natural level, you'll feel a little more centered and a little more at peace.
Yeah, and how do you know if it's going to work until you do it, right? One of the things we like to say on the podcast is once you start taking action, that's when things start to happen, right? You've got to do it in order to see the result, right?
Yep, I love that. Love it.
Yeah, exactly. Beautiful. So we've got one more episode left, which means that we can do one more sort of goal setting or goal tracking activity over this next week before our next episode. And so that's going to center, I guess, around this quiet time, right? Do you think there's anything that comes to mind and ways to track or log this that we can actually like have a measurable way to track our progress?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I would try and do it every morning for the next week. And also during the day, see how much you can possibly get out into nature. And then practice kind of what we talked about in the human-to-human relationships, where if you do have a Zoom call with somebody or even a phone call, just practice being mindful. So say maybe you have 3 or 4 meetings booked in the next week. Try being so focused and non-distracted, and maybe on day 1 it'll be difficult, but maybe on day 6 you might find it a little bit easier. So maybe we can log our meetings and see kind of gauge our level of distractedness, and it's also going to have it's going to be affected by the person that we're talking to as well. So you may be talking to somebody who's totally on top of their non-distraction game, and they're totally into the conversation. Then you may have somebody who just loves to talk over you,
right?
Who loves to be right all the time, which makes it really difficult to be and not rewarding. I mean, you can still be focused and centered in the conversation, but it won't be rewarding. So maybe we can track our meetings in that respect and see how we feel afterwards, and then see how our morning practice kind of compounds to add a little bit more focus into those meetings.
Yeah, and it's so synergistic, these things that we're gonna track, because you take this this morning routine of taking the quiet time, and the idea is that your neurons are more open to creating new pathways, right? So if we can use that sort of malleability, or the neuroplasticity, I guess is what the buzzword that people use, to actually link into the person we're talking with, I wonder what kind of results that could bring.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it'll make a difference whether you do your meetings in the morning or in the afternoon or in the evening, because it kind of wears off a little bit, as the day goes on, as you become more bombarded with external influences, and your mind and your shield is working a little bit harder to kind of keep yourself centered and focused.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely agree. It's more challenging at the end of the day. But for this week, we're gonna keep track of all of our meetings, maybe all of our conversations that we have, and maybe we'll come back with one or two moments that we found we really noticed some sort of difference there, on top of doing this practice throughout the morning each day, and taking as much nature in as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And try and follow those steps within the practice as much as you can, and try and make it 20 minutes. But the difficult thing about that is that you don't want to be looking at the clock all the time, and you don't want to be distracted in that sense. So if you feel like you've gotten what you need to get out of it, or you're starting to get really restless and you can't keep your mind from wandering in different directions, then the practice is done for the morning, because you don't want to waste your time sitting there thinking about stuff, because that's not exactly what the goal is. So if you find yourself checking the clock and like, oh, it's been 12 minutes, it's been 15 minutes, you can call it a day and go back to it again tomorrow, because like we said earlier, it's about the consistency as well. You don't want to push it to 20 minutes just for the sake of getting to 20 minutes if you don't think you're going to get anything out of it. But doing 10 minutes every day is better than doing 20 minutes once or twice a week.
Absolutely. It's about the quality of the practice, right? We want to be consistent, but also only practice it while we're doing it at a high level, right? It reminds me of, I was out at the driving range the other day, and it's like I was doing great for that start for the first half hour, but then the last 15 minutes I was there, it was absolute garbage. And I think I was just reinforcing problems in my game by staying there after I reached that point of diminishing returns, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if you've got the book, there's a big section in it that goes through all 9 of those steps. So you can refer back to it to see like what exactly does Trevor say. And if there's more tips in here than we can go over in an episode. So I'd really recommend picking up the book and taking a look at it.
Yeah, for sure. It's fantastic. You won't regret it. It's a life changer, and it's something you can go back to over and over again as well.
100%. All right. Well, before we wrap things up here, Jacob, I know we talked about it at the end of last episode, but where can people get in touch with you or find you if they want to follow what you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Jacob Mortgage Matchmaker on Instagram. You can follow me on LinkedIn. Just search my name, Jacob Manishevitz. Otherwise, I'll be doing content like this when Russell puts this stuff out. At the same time, I'm doing interviews with other professionals that I'm connected with, trying to ramp that up a little bit more in the last few weeks as well. So I should be putting out lots of good content. You can email me or give me a call if you want my contact information. Just reach out to Russell. I'm sure he'll be happy to share. Yeah,
that'll all be in either the show notes or the comments or wherever you're watching this. All that info will be right there for you to grab onto. All right. Well, thanks so much. Again, Jacob Manishevitz, and I'm Russell Matthews. This was part 2 of 3 for 3 steps, and we'll catch up with you next time. Thanks, Jacob.
See you next week. Thank you so much.
See you later.
Thanks for listening to the Business Builders Book Club, helping you bridge the gap between knowledge and action. Stay tuned and remember, when information becomes action, things start to happen.